Hello and welcome to another edition of IndyCar Weekly. I'm your host, Nathan Brown, motorsports insider for the Indianapolis Star. And on this week's episode, we'll break down all the action on and off the track at the Detroit Grand Prix, and we'll look ahead to Road America, the IndyCar's third race in 3 weekends and the end of a really busy stretch for the entire paddock before we get a chance to take a little breath and break before we look ahead to Laguna Seca at the end of the month. Joining me this week, as always, my co-host, Stefan Wilson. Stefan, get into talk about this Detroit Grand Prix, what it was like, what the future is for this venue, for this event. But man, what was that crash fest like watching from home on TV? It was tough for me to follow in the media center. I can only imagine what it was like for you as a viewer at home.
Yeah, well, I think if you're a fan of demolition derbies, then Detroit GP was for you. It was, at times it was entertaining. There was definitely a lot of action happening. I got to say the track and the venue looked 100% better than it did last year. Still has areas where I think things can be refined and just, further polished to make it look even nicer. They did a great job with the victory circle. That's something that I think could be implemented in a lot of different tracks around the country that the IndyCar go to. That definitely looked premier, like it was a premier event. But from the racing standpoint, there was just, like I said, at times it was entertaining. There was action. There was some close racing, but then you get into these yellows that continue to create more yellows. And I think you had a stat earlier where it was like 3 green laps in a course of 30 or 40 laps, which is not great. I think around the world, the perception probably is not a good perception of what the IndyCar product is. And I think some of that is down to just the fact that you've got 27 cars on a tight street circuit, but that also just the track itself, that long straight, you've got a really long straight leading into a bumpy, tight hairpin, and it was really inviting for people to make lunges and make really desperate, high risk moves that ultimately led to crashes and yellows. I think and also we've got this situation right now where a lot of stuff isn't getting policed. I know there was a lot of penalties in the race on Sunday, but it's leading up to this event. It's been very soft on giving drivers penalties, so it's kind of created this like wild west where drivers are getting away with things that they probably shouldn't be. It emboldens them, and then the victim then also goes, all right, well, if that's how we're racing, then let's go for it. So that unfortunately needs to be clamped down on, and I think drivers just need to have more respect for each other. But again, some of that is just the fact that there's 27 cars racing on a tight street circuit.
Yeah, there's a lot to get into. A level out of what you said there. Start with what you said at the end about the driving conduct. I thought Marcus Ericsson, who finished second in this race, we should say Scott Dixon wins his second race of the year, takes over the points lead from his teammate and defending champion Alex Palou. Dixon moves into Road America this weekend, I believe, with an 18-point lead over Palou. Those two Ganassi drivers have something like a 30-point lead on third place, Will Power. Interesting stuff to get into there about the championship that we can dive into a little bit later. But I thought Marcus had a really great point in the post-race press conference that we had with him, where he essentially said, I think we need to look a little bit at how we steward these races. And yes, there is absolutely a version or a portion of the blame that goes to the drivers and the conduct. But I think a lot of how drivers race in these races comes down to how they are officiated. And if you see folks not getting a whole lot of penalties or minimal penalties or penalties that aren't super impactful. I think I have to imagine that you're going to be a little bit more aggressive. And if you're having penalties like, you're getting sent to the back of the field on a restart and you get a race that's, yellow after yellow after yellow, where restarts are the opportunity for you to make up the most spots, and you are kind of just banking on the fact that we're going to have 3 or 4 of these restarts in a row like we had on Sunday, and you're someone that that's 15th in a 27 car field, and you want to make a lunge for something that might gain you 3 or 4 spots, and you're weighing, do I do this for 3 or 4 spots and hope I get away with it? What's the worst that, I guess the worst thing that can happen is you wreck your car and your race is over, and you got to hope that doesn't happen, and that's always a possibility. But maybe the second worst thing that can happen is you get called for avoidable contact, and you have to, there's versions of this, whether it's have to do a drive-through, which they don't typically do when they've got a bunch of cautions going on, because the impact of that is not always as large. They'll oftentimes seemingly drop you to the back. And if you're already running, mid-pack 15th, 16th or so, that's maybe not a big thing if you think you've got a car that, can make up those spots over the course of a couple restarts or a few green flag laps. So I would like to see, I think there are some things that maybe are called that don't need to, but I think some penalties need to be more extreme.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be, like, dropping 3 spots. Like, for example, Teo Pourchaire, his lunge on Canapino, which is a whole other can of worms that I don't know that we really want to dive into today. I'll just reference, I spent a lot of time on a piece that is up now on IndyStar.com that you can take a look at, that basically is all my thoughts on that matter. But the move on lap 60 on the restart, Teo lunges from, I believe, 9th, makes contact with Canapino, who's running 6th. They both have a bobble. Their cars both continue running on. And Teo, I think, is running 8th, and Canapino maybe drops a spot from 6th to 8th or 9th, something like that. Like, I almost would argue, I don't know. Like, do you think
that 100% should have been a penalty? I don't understand why it wasn't.
No, it was. He had to drop 3 spots.
Oh, so, okay. They didn't really make that clear in the broadcast. Like, I didn't see that happen. He did actually get a penalty for that. Okay.
He did. So he dropped 3 spots. I would argue
that's not enough.
I would do away with have to drop 3 spot penalties. I would say at minimum, if you have avoidable contact, you got to drop to the back of the field. And then guys are going to have to weigh more. Is this move worth it? Can I execute it? I think some of what we saw on Sunday was tires that were not getting to temp because it was just restart, 8 laps of caution, restart, 8 laps of caution.
Well, it's just behavior correction, and if you don't correct the things that are happening, then it just emboldens people to keep doing it. So, as you said, the consequences are not great enough. There needs to be consequences in the race, and I keep bringing up, the F1 product versus IndyCar product. I like that. Hey, if you do something that you're out of control and reckless, and you crash into someone, then there is going to be these penalty points that if you accrue enough of them, then you have to sit a race, or more or worse. So I think the IndyCar should really look at that and go, is this something we need to start doing? Because the crash fest that we saw at Detroit was not good for really anyone. It really impacted the quality of the race, the product that we saw impacted a lot of people's championships, and also created a lot of crash damage as well. And that's not going to make team owners very happy. So, I think if you're, if it's wheel to wheel and you're racing hard, that's one thing. But when you're out of control, reckless, and crash into someone, with all the stuff that's happened after the race, we'll set that aside. But what happened on that restart was totally I felt bad for Augustin because he was running a really good race, was in it, totally in the right to be able to turn into that corner, and then just gets wiped out. And the speed that Teo was carrying into the apex there was like, dude, you are never going to make the corner.
No.
So that kind of stuff is like that should be pretty severe penalty that you see for that, because it's not fair to Augustin, because he's on for his best result of the year, of his career,
Of his IndyCar
career.
And
that just gets taken away from him. Then he's got damage to his car, and then it's survival at that point. So that's I mean, there's a lot of things that we could do to make the racing better, or eliminate some of these yellows. I mean, we talked about it off air, but even a virtual safety car system, that's something that F1 has had for many years, where that we have the ability to do that. I'm confident, where we can implement something to that effect, where essentially when the yellow light system is activated, it kicks in, PLC or something like that on the car. So you're only allowed to go 60 miles an hour, or a version of PLC. That way it can control the field, stops everyone getting bunched up, which then leads to more yellows on a restart. So control the field, but without creating a bunch up, allows safety workers to safely, fix the situation, get the cars running that are stalled or in a runoff, and keep or preserve as much of the race as possible, to keep it green. So
what we saw on Sunday, particularly in turn 3, I feel like I got some decent perspective from talking to some drivers after the race. Some of what we saw, I think, was we've got tires that we've talked about it so many times, tires that were made by Firestone under the impression that we'd have hybrid in the car right now. So you've got a car that's lighter, you've got lighter than it was last year, you've got tires that are more durable than they were last year, and that's a tough combination when you're just doing restart after restart after restart, and guys aren't able to get their tires up to temp. So I think something like Pourchaire's crash there, for example, you've got tires not up to temp, you got a little bit cooler day, cooler track, so maybe there's not as much grip. He is a rookie after all. It was his 1, 2, 3, it was his 4th IndyCar race. And he fully admitted after the race he missed the breaking point, and he, I imagine he was maybe trying to do something. I don't think he was trying to be that overly aggressive, and he just made a mistake there. But I do think, as you said, you got to penalize that, so that guys aren't, if they're feeling like they're not comfortable to try enough to execute a move properly, that you're not gonna, what's the worst that's gonna happen here? I'm gonna lose 3 spots, as long as it's not too terrible. That's also it's a straight where, yes, they did some repaving going into turn 3 there compared to last year, but a lot of it is still the same. It's still very bumpy on portions, because you've got a lot of these intersections on Jefferson Avenue where you've got crowns that are there because you have to have drainage, and that's not going to get fixed. And so it's like what is it? I think it's the straight is like almost as long as the front straight at IMS. Is like 0.7 miles.
Yeah, it looks like that, yeah.
And you're reaching speeds of 180 or so, where on a surface that is far from flat, and then you're going in with tires that maybe aren't fully gripped up, and it was kind of just a recipe for disaster. And it was one of those situations where we had yellows breeding late yellows yesterday. But we'll move on. I'll move on from that. I love the thing you talked about with virtual safety cars. I'm really hoping that when we have the hybrid in the car starting at Mid-Ohio, that's supposed to come with this automatic starter that drivers in the car can flip on. I'm really hoping that we are going to see IndyCar use some more local yellows, which they do use on occasion, and sometimes even if it's a guy that's just barely off, or someone that, still has the car in gear and is, working to find reverse to maybe get back out. Sometimes they'll maybe throw a temporary local yellow to see what's going to happen. But knowing that, unless a car is really binned, ideally guys with this hybrid and with this automatic starter in the cockpit, you're going to have guys, even if they, slide into the tires like a Colton Herta or like a Scott McLaughlin, like we saw on Sunday, theoretically a guy should be able to still get the car restarted, still find reverse, back out of that situation, get the car turned around, and get back out there. And whether it's a use of local yellows more often, whether it's adopting some sort of a virtual safety car system, I'm hoping that we're going to see less of this and that races won't be impacted quite nearly as much as they were on Sunday, because we are having guys just run into a runoff and all of a sudden you've got 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8 laps of caution, and there's just no reason for that. And then when you have a couple of those in a row, you end up in situations like you referenced where we literally had a 50-minute span where we ran 3 full green flag laps. So you had 37 laps that were either under caution, a lap that started on a restart where you guys had a crash. It was tough TV, and I know there were some positive notes coming out of having more than 600,000 folks watching on cable, 4th most ever for an NBC cable network for an IndyCar race. But there was definitely potential for that to be higher. And I imagine if that race hadn't been so tough to get through in the middle of it, I have to think that number would have been higher. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, I think just looking at the track layout, I think 2-3 years ago when they announced that they're going to change from Detroit Belle Isle to go to downtown Detroit, and they showed the track map, I think anyone with a brain saw that long straight leading into a hairpin going, how's that going to work? It's going to be really inviting, and there's going to be lots of incidents there, like you could already predict it. And sure enough, that's where the majority of the incidents were, on restarts and, people getting ambitious. So, the layout, they've got to think about where do they want to start the race. And there really isn't another option with the layout, because the layout into the official turn one or the track width going into the official turn one is just not wide enough for 2 cars. So
there are a few spots on this track that are big enough for 2 cars.
Yeah. Can they fix the layout, or do the series really need to evaluate, like, what are we doing here? Can we go back to Belle Isle? Can we make that work? Because, there's something to be said, like the classic, when you watch back and you see classic races, you see Montoya hustling around the streets or the Belle Isle Grand Prix, in 1999, that heritage is there. And I feel like it would be a much more premier event, and just it would fit better to me on the schedule. Like, there's some history there at Belle Isle, and I hate that we've lost that. And I feel like the racing was better too at Belle Isle. So, that's above my pay grade, but hopefully, I saw a lot of drivers also saying the same thing. So hopefully that's been heard by the series, and they can evaluate it and make the right choices coming out of this.
So have what I feel like is some pretty good insight. So I'll try to address some of that as best and as quickly as I can from being on the ground. So Penske Corp Penske Corp President Bud Denker and Penske Entertainment Vice President Michael Montry held a press conference after the completion of the Detroit Grand Prix. It's essentially a tradition. It's been going on for many years, well before I jumped on the beat in 2020, that the race promoters essentially hop on. They have a press conference. It typically lasts about 30 minutes. Admittedly, a lot of it is them bragging or patting themselves on the back for any wins that they can find over the weekend. There's some good nuggets there. A lot of it is very spin heavy, as you would imagine. But there was a lot of perspective that I feel like those of us that were at that press conference on Sunday got on the future of this race. And there are, I will say, because it is a Penske Corp event and Penske owns the series, this is too important of a market to not be in. Full stop. We're not leaving Detroit. They are always, I think, as long as Penske is in the sport, they will always have a race in this market in some form. Now, the reason, or one of the major reasons that we left Belle Isle in the first place, is because the constant questions and protests and everything that Penske Corp had to deal with every single year they went back to Belle Isle because of the environmental concerns of folks locally there about racing in that park and in that area. I think some of why we changed here is that just got to be too much to deal with. Penske Corp spent a lot of money revitalizing that area, cleaning up, making it better than the way they left it every single year. And credit to them for doing that and preserving that race at that venue for so long. But it got to the point where I think at some level they were just really tired of having to deal with that. And they had an opportunity to bring this race back downtown like it had been during its F1 days and some of its early kart days. So I don't think as tough.
You don't think Belle Isle's coming back? You just
that's
a lot
what
of
I'm
hearts
getting to.
with that.
It was.
That's a shame. I understand what you're saying, and understand now some of the some of the factors that like kind of went into that. I just going forward, they need to look at the track map and figure out, okay, how do we make this, just a better race, and
Agreed.
fixing that turn 3 spot. We want to have passing. We want to create passing opportunities, but we don't want to create a crash fest. So they've got to find that fine balance there. And downtown Detroit, there's got to be more options to create a more compelling racetrack.
Yeah.
So they're in that area.
So they're, like I said there. So I don't think they're going back to Belle Isle because it was tough enough to be there when they were there. As much criticism as they dealt with while they were there, the idea of trying to convince folks to allow them to go back, I just don't think that's a tenable solution. So I think we're stuck. Maybe stuck's not the best word, but I think we're going to be on downtown streets in Detroit for the foreseeable future. Now, Bud and Michael say, these are the two guys that essentially put this track layout together. They obviously worked with Tony Kottman to help, work through the intricacies of it. But these are the 2-point guys that put this event together, planned the track, et cetera, et cetera. And so they say, obviously, you can't go any farther south because you're dealing with the river. You can't really very easily go farther north or west because you run into having to block off the tunnel that allows folks to go in between Canada and the United States. You obviously can't block off that border crossing for a weekend or weekend plus. So that makes that tough. If you lose Jefferson Avenue and go farther north, you don't have the straight anymore, and that's as good of an opportunity that you're going to have for something that's wide and long and continuous. This track needs a straight like this. As you said, I don't know that having a hairpin after it is maybe the best idea, but you've got to have this to some effect. And then looking east, according to Bud Dinker, it's just really tough to find spots where you have enough runoff. That was essentially the one thing that they looked into, I think, the most when they were finalizing this track layout to start. They tried to see if they could go a little bit further east into some of those neighborhoods, and they just essentially decided that there weren't proper roadways to be able to to offer what you would need for IndyCar racing. So I think, unfortunately, this is a long-winded way of saying I don't know that there are any ways. Yeah, in part because I think they went through a lot of work to put this together in the first place, and I just don't. I have to think if there were ways to make this any longer. I mean, they had to know coming in, you got 27 full-time cars on a 1.645 mile street circuit. That is a really, really, I mean, anything that's below 2 miles, and I think most, if not all, of our street tracks are below 2 miles. I mean, that's already short enough. St. Pete,
Yeah.
Long Beach, Toronto, things like that are somewhere in between. I think that 1.7 to 2.1 range, those are already fairly short. And so you got something that's even a good bit shorter than that. That's really tough. I just don't know that there are any other ways to change the layout of this track anymore. Unfortunately, I know there were some passes. There were some, Bud mentioned post race. He talked to Will Power, and Will said that he made passes in 1, he made passes in 3 and 5 and 8. So there are other places on this track where you can make passes happen. There are just, I don't think, other great areas of the track that are inviting for passes to happen. Ergo, when you have a bunch of restarts, of course you're going to have guys that are going to try to make passes into 3. And so it's just, I wish I wish this track layout was better. I wish it was more suitable. I wish there was just a little bit more length and one other really great passing opportunity. I just don't know that we're going to get that. And the reason why I also think this event is here to stay, as I mentioned, this is in Penske's backyard. This is in GM and Chevy's backyard. Two obviously very important stakeholders for this series. And according to Bud and Michael, this is a successful event from their standpoint for hospitality. They sold out 73 chalets, which are essentially suites that they had here at the venue. Now, I think that word sellout, quote unquote, is a little misleading. A lot of these, from what I understand, are folks occupying suites and chalets who have B2B, business to business deals with Penske Corp. And so they've got a lot of folks that might not be buying these directly, but they're getting them in deals with Penske because they've got some other relationships outside that. And the reason why this event now, I don't think is going to be moved out of this post 500 slot, Bud said, and he said this last year, is if you hold it when Detroit schools are released for summer break, so many of these executives that occupy these suites leave with their families to go up north for the summer. And so you've got these suites that are not occupied. I'm sure that would have some sort of an impact on the typical ticket buyer as well. But that is a way in which they can make this event viable from a financial standpoint. I think they felt like it was successful in that way. And they essentially said, again, some of this is that spin I was telling you about, but they feel like, people enjoy crashes, and it's action, and there's a way that you can spin that there was a lot of action on track on Sunday. Now, is it the right kind of action? I would argue no, but they see enough.
There's a lot of action in indoor go-karting too.
There is. That's true.
Guys like that, just go down to SIK, and Speedway, and just watch. There's just a ton of that kind of stuff happening. So, yeah. Love it.
Yeah. So that's a long-winded way of saying, unfortunately, I don't know that we're getting anything. It will be really interesting to see over these next couple of years. Something I didn't know going into this weekend that I think was announced in April of this year, so a couple months ago now. General Motors is leaving the RenCen. That's kind of the building that all of this is centered around. They are moving their headquarters somewhere else in the general Detroit area. And so there are a lot of people that think this massive monstrosity of a building that's essentially a bunch of office space is going to get knocked down, because in the real estate day and age that we're in now, the idea of selling it to someone else and having to do a bunch of renovation on a building that is decades and decades and decades old is just not really feasible. And it would probably also cost less to just knock it down than it would be to retrofit it for someone else. And so I think that we could see in the next couple of years. Now, I don't know if that's going to impact the the race and being able to hold it. I doubt it, but I wonder, 5 years down the road when this is knocked down and is not there anymore, and maybe there's some new roadways, like, does that offer you some more opportunities to tinker with the layout a little bit? Maybe. So that's something to look for, maybe. But I think in the near future, these couple years, I got to think we're pretty much stuck with what we got, unfortunately. So we just kind of have to hope. I mean, last year's race, thinking back, there were I want to say like 7 cautions, but only for maybe 32 laps. I'm sure a handful of those are going to be hopefully cautions that we mentioned we can get away from in the future. So maybe there's a way in which this race can be better officiated. Maybe driving standards are a little better, and maybe it's hopefully it's a little bit better race moving forward, and we don't continue to have things like what we saw on Sunday. So
absolutely. Well, let's hope that is the case. Let's talk about a couple of the stories coming out the weekend. A couple of results. I mean, it's hard to really read too much into some of the finishes. Like we said, Will Power finished 6th despite having, did you say 7 pit stops?
7 pit stops.
4 penalties?
Yes, correct.
And still finishes 6th. Even he was surprised by that with his comments on social media. He's like, I'll take it. I've no idea how I finished 6th, but awesome. Let's move on. So that really kind of sums it up.
Yeah, and that's a big thing for Will's title hopes. He still remains in 3rd place. He's about, as I mentioned, 30. I've got the list up here right now. Will Power is 31 points out of 1st place. Quick run through the top 5 of the championship right now. You got Scott Dixon in 1st, 216 points. Alex Palou in 2nd, 198. Will Power in 3rd, 185. Pato Award 4th, 160. Alexander Rossi 5th with 150. And there's several drivers there right around that top 5. Kyle Kirkwood's in 6th with 148. Colton Herta is in 7th with 147. Scott McLaughlin 8th, 141, and Felix Rosenquist in 9th at 140. So there's that group of essentially 4th to 9th is within 20 points of each other right now. So
exciting battle coming in for the rest of the summer,
Absolutely.
Not like last year where it was kind of runaway happening,
And I think, I look at that mark of Joseph Newgarden in 10th. I think that's probably where this championship gets cut off in terms of folks who consider themselves realistically still in this. Yes, if Christian Lundgaard in 11th, at 122 points, that makes him 94 points back. Yes, if he goes and has a career-defining stretch of 5 or 6 races, wins 3 of them, finishes on the podium in 2 others, and has another top 10, 100% Lundgaard could be back in this. But it's going to take an unexpected performance, I think, out of anyone outside that group. And frankly, for Joseph, it's not something that we would say is unexpected out of him, but he's going to have to win 4 races down the stretch to get himself back in this. He's
at least, and then you're also, it's going to come down to how Dixon and Palou, how they do. Palou had his worst weekend since I believe 2022 Indy Road Course.
Portland, I think, or
was
no?
It Portland?
So Portland, no, sorry, Portland was
Indy
the
Road
last.
Course.
Yeah, so Portland was the last time he didn't have a top 10. 2022.
Yeah.
He won the race after that at Laguna, but yes, you're right. Indy Road Course in 22 was the last time he finished worse than 16th as he did on Sunday.
So that kind of, if Dixon has a similar weekend to that, and Palou has another weekend like that, then that's really the only way that Joseph can find himself back in there. Because if Dixon and Palou keep doing what they normally do, which is finishing inside the top 5, that point difference is just not great enough to make up 90 points. You've got to be perfect for the rest of the season. And, with this series, that's unlikely to happen because there's just so much volatility in the races, So even if you're having a perfect weekend, hence Colton Herta, all it takes is a mistimed yellow or a bit of bad luck, or really, a late dive bomb to go wrong, and suddenly you're a lap down. So it's unlikely that you can see someone I say that, but we saw Palou do it last year, go and win like 4 races in a row, but or 4 out of 5. But yeah, seeing Joseph have that kind of consistency, it's hard to imagine, So there's got to be some bad luck on the guys in, Dixon and Palou, first and second, make that possible.
And let's be honest. I mean, Joseph, the reason Joseph hasn't won a championship since 2019, he hasn't been consistent. You always know, I'm not going to go back and look through every single season, but I feel fairly confident in saying you always know he's going to have 2, maybe even sometimes 3 finishes a year of 20th or worse that are just fluke things, whether it's a crash, whether it's a mechanical, whether he just makes a mistake, as he did on Sunday, that left him finishing 26th out of 27 cars. He makes, I don't quite remember the move exactly, but he was, one of those folks that made a mistake going into turn 3, maybe getting a little bit overly aggressive, trying to lunge. I think he was back in the top, 10th to 12th area. It's not like he was up front, but he was trying to make a pass, gets spun around. I think Alex Palou drives into the side of him. And Joseph obviously incurs some damage, has to get restarted, and is one of those folks that just kind of never recovered from that, even as things were getting really chaotic and, with more cautions and such. So he's now had 2 finishes of 26th. One of those, of course, being his disqualification at St. Pete. So that's a weekend where he lost 53 points. With that, he's right back in this. I think he's in third or fourth place. So that all looks very different, and we're talking about it very different, but that happened. So, if he's finishing, if he's winning 4 of these oval races that we've got 6 over the final 11 now to finish the year. Even if Scott Dixon is finishing 4th or 5th, you're making up 20 points or so. So even if Scott finishes in 5th in all those races that Joseph wins, you make up 80 points there. There's still 7 other races that Joseph essentially has to be even or better with Scott in, and we've just seen too much evidence over these last 4 or 5 years that I just don't feel confident in Joseph being able to do.
You bring up a great point there. The ovals could be the turning point for Joseph.
Yeah.
Just given the fact that there's now 2 more ovals on the calendar than there were last year. The double, the twin races at Milwaukee. We all know that Joseph is really, really strong on these short ovals. Penske's usually got a pretty good car they bring to these tracks as well. So, seeing him, if he goes back-to-back at Milwaukee and back-to-back at Iowa and has another top 3 at Gateway or Worldwide Technology Center, then, that could change things in his favor, but he still has to then put some really consistent performances, on the board at the rest of the road courses and the street courses.
Yeah, I mean, he can't finish outside the top 5 the rest of the year if he's going to finish in the championship, full stop.
Pretty much, yeah.
And the number of ovals that we have on the calendar, I think, are the only reason that I wouldn't just outright eliminate it. Exactly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, for sure.
So who of this? So we've got Will in 3rd right now. I would say, if I look at this, I think there are only, I would say, 3 serious contenders for the championship left. Guys that, if I was betting, that I would feel somewhat comfortable putting some money on. And I would say that's Dixon, Palou, and Will, 1, 2, and 3. Who of this group of, let's say, 4th through 8, so Pato, Rossi, Kirkwood, Herta, and McLaughlin, who out of this group do you think has the best chance to make some sort of a run and at least put themselves into this top 3 conversation, or be in the conversation when we get to, say, Milwaukee, the doubleheader there, and in closing with Nashville at the Super Speedway there? So the final 3 races of the year, who do you think of that group of 5 has the best chance to still be in the conversation then?
I don't really feel good about any of them, really. There's none of them that stand out and go, okay, yes, they can go on a huge tear, win a bunch of races back to back, and really make up the ground that's needed. Dixon's just so consistent. It's hard to go against him. And we all saw last year that Palou, can put these performances together where he just, he's almost untouchable. The only thing that I think plays against Palou this year is he's starting from a worse position at this point in the season, this stretch that we're going on to.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 3 extra ovals than there were last year, and there's 1 less street course. So there's less. I don't feel like he has shown the oval performances yet that we've seen, that's needed. So it's really hard to bet against Dixon right now. Like I feel so strongly about that. He's just the all-rounder that can just keep putting up these consistent results, turning bad days into good days. What he did at the 500, clawing his way back up to 3rd from probably his worst starting position ever. And then, this what he did at Long Beach, what he did at Detroit, saving fuel, going off strategy, just making something out of nothing. It's like they're always, that number 9 crew and that team, that organization there on the 9, that are always making lemonade out of lemons. And, with the addition of the ovals, I think that gives him the edge over Palou, the potential edge. Newgarden is going to have to, I would honestly say, look, I know we've just sort of written off Joseph. I would honestly, now I'm thinking, you brought up a good point, Nashville. I didn't even think about Nashville as being, flipped from a street course to an oval. I've got to think that Joseph in his hometown at Nashville Super Speedway is going to show really well there. And it's hard to bet against him at Iowa. It's hard to bet against him at Milwaukee. I raced against him at Milwaukee. He's pretty sharp around there. And again, at Worldwide Technology Raceway, I think the rest of the season really plays into Joseph's hands.
Yeah.
But it's the road courses. If you're asking me right now, who's the bigger threat out of those group that you just mentioned and Joseph, I would go with Joseph.
I think as you were saying that, I think it's a very valid argument that outside of the top 3, Joseph in 10th, it represents the biggest threat to the guys that are in the top 3. I think you could 100% say that.
If he goes and wins both Iowa races, as he did last year, you could make up potentially 40 points over Palou, Dixon, depending on if they finish 2nd, 3rd, or 4th. So you make 40 points up there, you got 50 points gap left, and that's not unattainable. I guess it really depends on how Road America goes. I think he showed, was he on pole? Joseph was on pole last year at Road America, or was it McLaughlin?
Might
have been McLaughlin.
Might have. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Either way, it's a Penske track where they're pretty strong usually. So coming out of this weekend, I think you're really going to see, okay, who outside of Palou and Dixon, who's the contender, and that put McLaughlin and Newgarden, I think would be my choices, but I think I'm leaning really heavily towards Newgarden now after just talking through it all.
Yeah, I think McLaughlin being so Scott is 13 points ahead of Joseph. I think Scott has a chance if he proves that he has taken a major step in his oval performance. Essentially, everyone in this group that we're looking at, so take out these top 3. So Pato, Rossi, Kirkwood, Colton, McLaughlin, even down to Felix. Rossi and Pato are the only ones in that group that have even won an oval race in their career. Colton's looking for his first one. Kirkwood's looking for his first one. McLaughlin as well. Felix, even Palou hasn't won on an oval yet. So I think a lot of what's going to define this championship race is going to really come down to, can anyone other than Joseph Newgarden figure out how to race really well and win some races on an oval? We typically, outside of Will's season in 2022, when he won just a single race and compiled, 9 podiums to win that championship in 2022 over Joseph, who again finished in 2nd place. You typically need at least 3 wins So Dixon has 2, Palou has 1 in the regular season. Pato now has 1, but you're looking at this group. McLaughlin has 1, Joseph has 1. Like, you're looking at that group of folks that either needs to win 2 or maybe 3 of the rest of the schedule to have a chance. I could see a Kirkwood or a Herta being able to say win at Road America and then also at Mid Ohio, or Road America and Laguna. Road America and what else do we have on the schedule? Portland. Like, I could see, but I think they're going to have to, like, one of these guys, if there's going to be someone, say, other than Dixon, really anyone other than Dixon, I think you're going to have to win an oval race. Even Power hasn't won on an oval, I don't think, in a little while. So I'm excited to see
at least one of the oval races,
mm-hmm.
And potentially absolutely. 2,
So I think that could be, say, a career, another one of these career defining moments for Palou, where he's won 2 championships so far, and now he shows us over the next couple months that he's figured out how to race well in ovals. He had, I think, podiums last year, both at Texas and at Iowa. So he's getting there, but he still certainly hasn't been able to match Joseph. Again, no one really has. Dixon actually won an oval race last year at Worldwide Technology Raceway, but again, if I remember correctly, Joseph, I think, had crashed out of that race, and
fuel save
another one of those real funky fuel save races for Dixon where the planets aligned and he was, it was weird. I remember there was like 2 or 3 cars on the lead lap at the finish. It was just some really funky circumstances.
You avoided doing one more stop like everyone else, pretty much.
Exactly. So, could McLaughlin show us that he's, he was on pole for the 500. He has been close on an oval a couple times. Can he show us that he's now, in the work that he's done with Simon Pagenaud in the off season? I know a lot of that was Indy focused, but can he show us that he's starting to reach the level of Joseph Newgarden? Could he go and win one of the 2 races at Iowa and maybe Worldwide Technology Raceway, or one? I think there's potential for something like that, but I do have to say, when you throw in, can you win on the oval? Can you be consistent? We haven't even talked about the hybrid element of all of this. Can you figure out new technology, how to best exploit it? How can your team figure out a way to be reliable with this new equipment moving forward? Ganassi is far and away the most reliable team that we've seen with mechanical failures up and down the paddock. Like, a lot of these things are really seemingly starting to align for Dixon, as long as he can, keep it on track, keep logging, top 5s, top 6s, maybe 1 or 2 more wins along the way, a couple more podiums. I think he's going to be really tough to beat, but I'm hoping that we've got an exciting championship race between 3 or 4 of these other guys. It was tough last year covering that Alex Palou runaway. You struggle to find storylines outside of that at some level, and I do think we've seen enough parity. Dixon, I think, is the only guy with multiple wins this year, multiple points paying wins. I think we've seen enough parity where you could have a really exciting championship race, and I hope we have it. It would be fun to see.
Yeah. One of the other storylines coming out of the weekend, obviously Elio was in for Blomqvist, and it sounded like the team is officially moving on from Tom. At least it's, Marty Snyder said on the broadcast that was the case, but I don't know if that was a slip of the tongue and was not the case. What have you heard from being on the ground in Detroit?
Yeah, so I'm hoping to get a silly season piece up here in the next couple of days. That's one of the elements of that, but give folks just a little bit of a sneak peek. Essentially, I talked to one other, I would say, well-informed source, Paddock, who was under the impression and had been told by another member inside MSR that those indeed are the plans to move on from Tom for the rest of the year. That's not confirmed. With situations like this, things could always be fluid. I don't know that I would say I'm not going to bet my life that Tom's not going to be back in an IndyCar later this year. Some of it can just depend on how the point situation is going, how the folks that they put in the car are doing. There's not a ton of options out there. The ones that come off the top of your head are, having Elio run the ovals that are on the rest of the calendar, having David Malukas run the ovals. He's been a strong oval driver in the 2 years that he was with Coyne before he moved to Arrow McLaren to start this year. Do you have someone like Callum Ilott come and run some of these road course or street course races that don't conflict with his World Endurance Championship schedule?
I'd love to see David Malukas get that opportunity. I'm pretty high on David. I think he's a really good driver, and I think he deserves a shot. And I think in really quality machinery, and as we've seen, it's definitely the Shank cars have been really solid. They're essentially Andretti cars, and Andretti's having a much stronger year, I'd say, this year than in years past. They've been more all rounders. So I think David could really shine in that. So hopefully he's healing well, and hopefully that he's making some calls to Jim Meyer and Michael Shank. So
yeah, it's hard to imagine unless he doesn't heal back up. According to plan, I think the last update that he'd given was making it sound like he might be ready or close to fully healed by mid-June. So we have the first
quite well with the timing of Elio been in for the next next race, and there's a break. That takes us to mid-June.
maybe he starts back on the ovals, which don't start until July 13th. So that's still more than a month from now. Essentially 5 weeks. So I could see something like that potentially working out for him and could be a good fit. There doesn't seem like there's one really great option that can just take the reins the rest of the way, unless it's Elio. And I just really don't think that makes a whole lot of sense for the team, who's seems to be moving on from Tom, meaning that they're going to have an open seat, whether they fill that with someone who's already in the paddock right now, whether they fill that with someone who's in the Indy Lights paddock right now competing for a championship. That's certainly a possibility, but again, you're not going to see one of those guys fill out the rest of the year. So if you feel like you have your sights set on someone filling that seat next year, someone who's already in the paddock and someone who's already under contract and is already on the grid, then maybe you go with like a Connor Daly or Ryan Hunter-Reay or someone like that who's maybe you tell them kind of already have our sights set on someone else, but we're more than happy to give you the opportunity because we know you can do this. If you're unsure about what you want to do with this seat, then maybe you are giving Callum a couple races and you're giving David a couple of races, and maybe there's someone in the F2 paddock that you want to explore, or someone who's a reserve driver in the F1 world. MSR is shown that they're not afraid to dive into that world and have some good contacts over there.
Well, at the same time, this experiment with Tom obviously hasn't worked for them. So I wonder if they're a little bit like gun shy on taking that kind of a risk going forward.
Yeah,
and just sort of go, hey, let's go with someone that's in known quantity. And
it's a fair point.
Again, I'm still going to say Lucas would be the best fit. And don't people overlook him because he spent 2 years at Coyne, and in a under-resourced Coyne, that is, and still managed to get on the podium a couple of times. I finished 6th at Mid-Ohio with Coyne in this era is pretty dang good.
Agreed. And then there's you do bring up a great point, and I guess I would probably retract that. The idea of them giving someone their IndyCar debut when Elio told me that they made this move in lots of ways because of where they are in the leader circle race right now. That seems like a far stretch. Now, do I think that Elio, just with what he's done on road and street courses over the last year, is going to position them in in the best place to prevail in that leader circle championship? And maybe he could get that car to 21st or 20th, but to be honest, Elio still is a great oval driver, but he hasn't shown what you would want to see on road and street courses over the last couple of years that would make you confident that he's going to get it out of that. He finished 26th in what was a tough weekend, or no, he was somewhere maybe 25th this weekend at Detroit. So it was a tough weekend for Elio. Again, I think you make a great point. I think you look at Callum, you look at Malukas, maybe as someone like Oliver Askew comes out of the woodwork, but I think you've got to have someone you are confident enough and is a known quantity that is going to at least on these road and street courses be able to help you out in a big way. So I think some of those names make a lot of sense. Elio is set to run the race here this weekend at Road America, and then it sounds like the team will probably reevaluate. They've got a weekend off to revisit things and see what the chessboard looks like. That's one of the many silly season things that we have, that are raising lots of eyebrows and looking at with some bated breath to figure out how that works. Again, I hope to have a silly season piece out here in the next couple of days to kind of give folks a better idea at what the lay of the land is. That's the next thing on my radar, other than hopefully covering an exciting weekend here at Road America. Just do a quick run through of what the schedule looks like this weekend. We have practice 1 from 4 to 5:15 Eastern time. Again, all of these times are going to be Eastern time, even though we've got the Central Time Zone there up north of Milwaukee. Practice 2, Saturday morning from 11:10 to 12:10, qualifying from 3:25 to 4:55 on Saturday afternoon. Morning warm-up from 12:15 to 12:45 on Sunday, and then the race broadcast starts at 3:30 and runs until 6. That green flag for Sunday's race, I think pretty close to that 3:30 mark. This isn't going to be one of these races where we have a big, long lead-in program. So if you're someone who plans to be watching this race on NBC, I would get to your TVs pretty close to that 3:30 start time. Really excited to come cover this race. This is always one of my favorite venues on the calendar, both for the track, just the vibe around Road America. Food's obviously great, and it's just a fun track. It's one of, I think, the best tracks that we race on this.
It really
calendar.
is. It is perfect for IndyCar, and perfect to witness IndyCars in there, and just their environment. It's from a spectator standpoint, a lot of good opportunities on grass mounds to get good a good viewpoint of the cars on track. So anyone that's on the fence about going, definitely it's one that you should be adding to your sort of IndyCar bucket list for sure.
Absolutely. I think that'll do it for us this week on IndyCar Weekly. We'll be back again next week, hopefully on Tuesday or Wednesday, to break down what we hope is a much more exciting, different kind of action-packed race at the permanent road course at Road America. Thanks for listening this week to IndyCar Weekly. For Stefan Wilson, I'm Nathan Brown. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you again next week.